Thanks for coming, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. I'm Samira Rajabi. I am a assistant professor at the University of Colorado, and I teach in a media studies program. And part of what I care about in my teaching is navigating AI with students rather than just being like, I don't know, we're just gonna wing it till someone makes us figure this out. And because we teach in a media and technology program, and because part of my expertise is digital media, I want to bring this into my pedagogy as much as possible. So I'm really excited to be here. We'll have a couple of opportunities to go into breakout rooms and things like that to chat. So I can't wait to hear from y'all. But let's just go ahead and jump in. So this all started when I had to teach a summer class this summer, and I was just coming off maternity leave, and I was thinking back to the last class I taught before I went on leave, and I was getting a couple of essays from students that ended really strangely with things like, thank you for reading my essay. Or one said, it has been your pleasure to read my writing, which was a weird thing for anybody to say and for students to say. And I was like, has it been? This is a weird, you don't talk like that. And so I knew something was afoot. And that something was probably, somewhere along the lines of ChatGPT. So I had to figure out where AI fit into my curriculum. And as somebody in a media studies program and a teacher of digital media, I wanted to bring the students along with me. Part of my pedagogy and the way that I teach is to think with students rather than talk at them. And so I wanted to know where they were at, and I wanted to get a sense of what they were doing. And so I kind of turned my class into a little experiment where I could bring the students along, and we created various modules to try to explore what they were thinking about AI and what they were thinking about the tools that were suddenly handed to them and they didn't know what to do with them. So I'm just going to share one of those modules. I actually put 4 through the online class to get feedback from students and to get a sense of where they were at. But this one was our first one, and I think yielded the most interesting information. So here's what happened when I tried to figure out AI in the curriculum alongside students. So first, I had to go to our university's website to figure out what the heck are they saying about AI and what do they want me to do in the classroom, and what would they do with that essay that says, you have derived great pleasure from reading my essay today. And they don't know what to do. The institution does not have a policy on AI in the curriculum because there is no one-size-fits-all approach. The goal is to empower students to use the appropriate innovative tools. So we don't want to hamper students from using these tools, but we are not really sure what to do with them yet. And our institutional infrastructure and policy has not caught up to the technology. And universities and K through 12 schools can move in terms of policy at a glacial pace. And so they punted, right? The guidelines around AI use allow faculty and instructors to determine how and when a student can use AI in coursework. However, students are responsible for working with their professors to understand guidelines. And what I found in talking to my peers and colleagues is a lot of the faculty punted to students. A lot of the instructions were like, well, let's just figure out what the students are doing and see what they're doing. Or they basically just did kind of what this last thing says, and they made it cheating. Basically, if you used AI, you were cheating, and if you didn't, you weren't. And so there was no in between to figure out how we might facilitate the use of these tools in a productive way for our students, which is kind of where I wanted to figure out what we should do next. So what did the university mean? They were like, AI, we're really not sure, but it's probably cheating. So probably treat it as cheating. And we actually saw an uptick in what we call honor code violations, which are students that are sort of called out for violating the honor code in some way. But that didn't seem fair to me. And that didn't seem like the most productive way to do that. And so I wanted to see if there was a better way. So I also wanted to be mindful of what happens to students. So the consequences of AI misuse, this is directly from our institution's website. Students who use AI in coursework outside of the standards for the course may face an honor code violation. Honor code violations become very serious. They follow students. They can hamper their ability to get their degrees, things like that. Professors and instructors retain the sole authority to determine appropriate academic outcomes. And so I was curious because, you know, this was like a non-policy policy, what other faculty were doing. And what I found was that people didn't have a standard, and they didn't have policy written into their syllabus, and they didn't have policy written into their assignments. And so students really didn't know what to do. So what I want to talk about first, before we jump into some of what I heard from students, is what are the alternatives you've seen in your work, in your environment, at your schools, K through 12 or otherwise, that are alternatives to the no policy on AI. So how can teachers and students be brought up to speed on the tools, and what are some parameters you've seen or that have worked for you or that you've heard about that you'd like to see? So I'm going to put us in a couple of breakout rooms just so we can talk to each other a little bit, and then we'll all come back together and we'll sort of recap what we talked about and see if anybody had any insight. So let me find my Zoom controls. All right, so I'm gonna make maybe 4 breakout rooms, and we will come back together in a few minutes. So chat with your colleagues and peers. I would love to hear any insights from your conversations about how you've kind of implemented bringing teachers and students up to speed on these tools, where you're kind of at in policy, or if there's anything kind of you heard in these conversations that you would like to share. I'd love to just do a little talk back real quick.
Hi, my name's Dan. I'll share from breakout room one. I think what I heard from everyone in the breakout room one is the schools are not, they don't have policies yet. And so by default, we're all no's. We want to explore, our teachers want to explore, especially in the English and maybe history classes. But because of the lack of school policies, it's mostly blocked, especially on campus for our students, which leads it difficult to know what's being generated by AI outside the classroom and being brought into school compared to what's happening inside the classroom, because we have no control over it.
That's really interesting, right? And it kind of hampers our ability, right, to effectively engage student use of the tool when we're sort of not approaching it at all. Any other insights that anybody would like to share?
Sure. I don't remember which breakout room number I was, but we were basically what my breakout room had. We came to the same conclusion that most of our districts don't have a policy. And insofar as anyone had a policy, it was mostly around how not to use it. In other words, it's just baked into the academic integrity. And so we would like to see a little bit more of where, peppered into either the curriculum or scattered throughout the courses, to have a little bit more guidance as to where it should be included. And one of the other members had a red light, green light, yellow light prompt that showed, like, this is where you can use it, this is where it's encouraged, and then here's where you can't use it.
That's awesome. I think that's really interesting, right? Because there tends to be this desire to say, like, okay, well, we don't want students to use it to cheat, so let's just put it over in this academic integrity box. And then I don't know about you, but I don't feel like avoiding technology has ever helped us figure out how to effectively use technology before, right? So these are really interesting conversations, and I hope some of the insights I got from my college students will help y'all kind of think through how students that are kind of coming up might be thinking through this. So one of the things our institution has encouraged our students to do is to engage the question themselves, which is great in some ways, but it also puts a lot of burden on the students. So these guidelines for students, which I don't think a lot of students are probably on our AI misuse and policy guidelines webpage looking up questions to ask their faculty members, but nevertheless, here we are. But they're encouraged to ask things like, are there specific AI tools or resources approved for this course assignment? Can you provide an example of how we can use AI in this course assignment? Should I include a section in my assignment explaining how I use AI tools to complete it? I've never seen a student do any of this with me. I've never had a student kind of engage these questions, but then when I ask students, have you been using any of these AI tools? They all say, yeah, it's just like any other search engine, right? So it's not actually registering for college students at least, that they might need to negotiate this in a particular way. Obviously, if they're spitting an essay prompt into ChatGPT and submitting the essay, they know that, right, is different than using it as a tool. But in general, they haven't really engaged these conversations very deeply. So I wanted to think through it, because what I've realized in my decade or so of teaching is that students don't know what they don't know, but they do know how to jump on technologies. And every student in my class of 38 that I asked over the summer said that they use ChatGPT, Bard, or others to help them understand concepts, work out assignments, and more. About half talked about using things like Adobe's image generation tools to help with assignments, but also things for fun. We had a lot of gamers, for example, that like to use some of these image generation tools to build out these like worlds that they like to engage in their game. So a lot of really interesting stuff. So I decided I needed to get us all on the same page. So I crafted a series of modules, and I'm only going to share the first one with you. But I had students listen to a couple of news stories from the New York Times via podcast about some of the proliferation of these tools, so that students that weren't familiar or perhaps didn't use them as much could enter into the conversation as well. And then we had kind of a general conversation. So they listened to 3 episodes from the New York Times podcast, The Daily. The first, where they're introducing kind of ChatGPT and AI tools and what they are and what the potentials of them are. Then they introduced Microsoft's artificial intelligence and talked through that. And then they talked about how the Microsoft artificial intelligence turned on the reporter and told the reporter to leave his wife, and that he was in love with him, and it got super weird. If you're interested in how these tools can kind of go a little sideways, this February 17th episode of The Daily is definitely worth a listen. But then I asked them what they thought about the ethics of AI, because the ethics question has been the question that has driven a lot of the university discussion of it. And then I wanted to know what they use. How do they think about them? Do they think about them at all? Are they afraid of them? What are they excited about? And so these are the questions I had given to students in their prompt after they listened, and we'd had some conversations about these episodes. And I want to share with you a little bit about what students shared with me. So in terms of what generative AI can enable, there were students that got really excited. So this was one of my gamer students, and this is an image from his favorite video game that he used the Adobe AI to extend the world. And then he created a whole series of artwork with it, where he was putting new characters into new scenes and extending the world. So he said, I personally have experimented with a beta feature on Adobe Photoshop. I took existing backgrounds from a mobile game I play, extended the borders and the original background, let Photoshop fill in the extra space. There were some pretty cool results with it. All sides have been extended, emulating the art. It's pretty crazy. And what George kind of told me in conversation with him is that he was told to use these Adobe Photoshop tools in his hands-on practical classes, his photojournalism classes. And so he felt empowered to be able to do it in other classes, but wouldn't have maybe done so if he didn't feel like it was supported in his classes. So that was kind of an interesting thing about what's exciting to the students about this. But then when asked about their concerns about the ethics, they said some really interesting things. So I know this is a lot of text on the screen, but I would think it's a really useful way to help us kind of understand what students are thinking about, because so often we're thinking from a instructor integrity institutional lens that we're not actually realizing that the same excitement and anxiety we have, they might share. So Brittany said, one of the biggest concerns, I think, is it can generate misinformation and potential bias. Major example of this is AI taking someone's voice or image and creating something completely false, which has the potential to be harmful to that person. The only AI I have really tried using is ChatGPT. I know that it is easy for people to have it write your paper or finish your homework problems for you, but I don't use it to cheat. So we also see her kind of invoking this language of cheating without being prompted in that direction. I think something like ChatGPT can be helpful when utilized correctly and honestly. I sometimes use it as a replacement for a question I'd ask Google, or use it to help explain a concept I'm struggling to understand. I think AI is scary. I think there is a lot that could change because of its use and existence. I'm worried for the future of education and what it means for kids who choose to constantly use AI to do their work instead of learning themselves. I think it could be taking away from our human culture as a whole. Work productivity, culture, and creating art have all been influenced by AI. AI's ability to produce art has taken away from real artists that have put time, effort, and practice to create their art, which can now be copied in a few seconds by AI. In terms of doing work and productivity, has made finding answers to things easier and faster. People are doing less work because the AI can do it for them quickly. In turn, it's creating this new culture of AI to solve a number of problems, but at the same time, it's creating them. I think AI could be a positive thing in the future if it is used correctly and if it does not spread false misinformation of any type. What was really striking to me about this answer and many other answers I got from my students is the discourse I'd been hearing in meetings and in sort of these from our policy wonks at the institutional level is that students are going to wholeheartedly want to use ChatGPT. They're going to want to use Bard. They're going to want to use Microsoft's AI. They're going to use all these tools and they don't care about cheating and they don't care about what happens. They're just early adopters and all they care about is adopting the thing and moving forward through it, when in reality, a lot of the same negotiations we're having on our end as instructors, they're having on their end as students, right? Another student talked about losing a sense of authenticity and the danger of AI and a fear that it would take control of everything and they would somehow lose control and or authorship of the work that they've done. So we also see how these values around productivity, culture, and work and ownership have really become a part of kind of the moral framework of our students and how they're really trying to negotiate how AI might change that for them and for their generation, which I think is a really important thing to be mindful of. So in other words, kind of going over all of the student responses, things that students were concerned of: authenticity, control, identity, and how AI might shift the way people perceive themselves as workers, as students, as cheaters or not cheaters, as problem solvers. A lot of students articulated that they were worried that if they admitted to using some of these tools, that their instructors and other people would think that they're less smart or capable of figuring things out on their own, or that they're less industrious. Whereas other students would respond back, oh no, that makes you more industrious to use the tools available to you. But we see them really grappling with a lot of the same moral questions that we're grappling with. And they thought a lot about safety and what happens when a technology moves faster than we know what to do with it. But in the immediate for students, students were really interested to be a part of this conversation about when it's cheating and when it's not, and when it's part of doing your own work and when it's not. So Katie said, I think there are many ethical problems surrounding the use of AI, but one that I find most upsetting is how it provides so many shortcuts. I am a person who believes in doing your own work and putting in time to the things that matter, not matter what they are. AI kind of ruins this. It allows instant access to creations and words that are not our own. It allows for art and other thoughts and work to be stolen with no credit and for us to claim it as our own. It has affected originality in a great way, and I find it scary that this is just the beginning of AI and do not really wish to see it evolve further as a public resource. And in response, another student articulated, well, this is all part of kind of open access, and open access is better for everybody. To which this student responded, I wish my instructors would have clear guidelines of when it is not allowed, when it is allowed and not allowed. Like they really were kind of asking me, please take control of this nebulousness, which is an exact opposition to what the university has kind of done, which is punted responsibility onto the student. It's your responsibility to ask your faculty if you want to use these tools. It's kind of all in your hands, which for college students, they're adults, right? But they're also still students, right? They're learning and they don't know what they don't know. So kind of the question and the discourse at this university has been, do students even care? They're going to use it anyway, but they do care, right? So one additional long quote, I've used these tools for personal use, but was also encouraged to use them in one of my Create Adobe classes earlier this semester. AI holds a lot, from generating text to creating videos and even creating AI to generate people and make them talk and sing, etc. When using it, I felt as if it is easily used in the wrong way. It is very creative and intelligent, but as much as it is a helping hand, it can be guided to be too much of a helping hand, as it is just doing it for you. Asking for ChatGPT to be creative help or ideas or brainstorming, I fully get it. But asking it to answer questions for you that you can answer yourself in some ways is cheating to me. If you can answer it yourself, you should not need to use an outlet. I completely understand wanting to check or to come up with stronger sentence or whatnot, but when you are not approaching it as a helping hand, but approaching it to do for you is where it misleads me. Often these generated responses are only partially accurate, making me even more confused than before, sometimes jeopardizing what I have learned and the time I put into learning and researching. What this really cues to me is also the ethos that was being articulated through these meetings I was attending in the honor code, that are these assumptions that any student ever is going to take a shortcut, that all students want is to get the work done. When in reality, so many people are invested in the actual learning of the thing, right? And disallowing that discourse when we talk about students is disallowing them any agency in that learning process. And I think that that's really important when we think about where we want to put policy around these tools, how we want to train both instructors and students in using them effectively, and how we want to kind of approach the way that they're changing our own engagement with assignments in the classroom. So again, talking about fairness with peers, Allison talked about the major ethical issue is when people use it to do their work instead of them doing it on their own, and talked about unfairness to themselves and their peers, knowing full well that some students are taking that shortcut, right? Not a lot of them, but there's a small amount of students that are taking that full, let me pump this essay prompt and these readings into ChatGPT and see what it gets me and go from there. And they don't think that that's fair to them. And they've actually said that to each other in classroom conversations. Hey, I don't actually think you did the reading. And then I've watched students kind of negotiate this with each other. Well, I just used ChatGPT to help me understand it because it was hard, right? And so what's the boundary? That boundary of where it becomes a tool, right? Where it becomes, I read the Cliff's Notes after I read the book versus I read the Cliff's Notes instead of reading the book, right? And I think that that's the conversation our students need our help with. But we also have to recognize that, like, if we're excited about the possibility of something, they probably are too. One student said, honestly, I sometimes use AI to help me understand concepts or give me a few ideas about a certain topic. I also let students know that they could admit to full ChatGPT use in this classroom without any consequences, right? I just wanted to have the open conversation. I don't know if they did, but I hoped for honesty in their answers. But she said, it's really informative tool, but sometimes it gives outdated information or inaccurate information, which is why we should not rely on it. I feel like it's fine to use it to get some ideas as long as you don't let it do your work for you. So students were sort of using it almost like they would Google, throwing a prompt in there and seeing what they get. And often throwing a prompt in there over and over and over again to see what they were getting differently, right? Which is akin to scrolling through the answers in Google till you get the one that kind of fits the thing that you were looking for. So I want us to talk a little bit about ways you think it could be useful to bring AI into the classroom in terms of student assignments, right? When you give a student assignment, do you think that we should allow them to be using these tools at all? Should we have a reflexive conversation with our students about it? Should we have a conversation among colleagues before we present these to the students? What are the conversations we should be having? So I would just be curious, based on what you've heard so far and your experiences, kind of where you are. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms just for about 3 minutes, and then we will come back together and chat. All right, so let's jump back in. Okay, so would anybody like to share some of their reflections that they've had in conversations around kind of where folks are at and what kind of conversations we think we should be having with our students?
I can share. Sorry, I just turned my video on. So our group was talking about two of us have students who are our children, or who have children at the school. And I was saying how my children are such that if we didn't have a school guideline and a kind of a classroom use guideline, that they would go around feeling guilty all the time. because of those ethical questions, especially that you brought up with some of your college students. My own children would feel the same way. And I don't want them to have to sneak around. I don't want them to have to try to navigate that and feel like they're sneaking around. And so we need to have a school-wide conversation and talk about ways in which we can model appropriate use in our respective classrooms.
I think that's really important because, you know, even in college students who have ostensibly built their moral framework, right? They're adults now, they're really struggling with kind of the right and wrong of it. And I think for kids especially, you know, we were talking in our breakout group about my 11-year-old niece, always wondering if she's like overstepping, right? And it's so helpful for them to have that conversation, but also feel kind of empowered in that conversation to like share why they're feeling guilty or what they're feeling guilty about. I think that's super, super important. Any other insights from y'all's conversations?
Me and Kongji had a pretty short discussion. We were talking about like critical thinking, how important it is that like the process is the part we don't want compromised. And it's always scary because like as a teacher, the more you emphasize the product, which you have to produce, at least in the way things are structured, the more likely you are to compromise that process. But one thing I kind of want to back off of, you know, and build on Katie's comment, and this is something that I always find frightening. I've already heard it a couple of times in sessions, like where people need a framework, people need a guideline, but I'm honestly genuinely frightened when you have top-down frameworks that tell you what to do. And it's because it's like we all want guidance because we don't necessarily know what to do. But I honestly have no faith whatsoever that the people up top are going to create legitimate practical guidelines that are actually going to progress what we're trying to do.
I mean, thank you for that, because as you saw the guidelines that the very upper echelon of my institution offered, it was a lot of like bureaucratic doublespeak for nothing, right? And then they're like, it's all on you, best of luck, right? And the fear on the flip side is that you get a guideline that disallows you from effectively engaging your students with these tools, right? That disallows you from having honest conversations with students about these tools because they're so afraid of being caught cheating, right? And that was kind of why I wanted to hear from the students, because one of the ways, sort of to speak to your point, that I like to structure my assignments even for college students is because the outputs can produce such anxiety, right? I need to have a perfect output from this assignment. So instead, I try to find ways to grade the process, right? What questions did you ask when you wanted to start your essay? What questions would you have wanted to send to ChatGPT? That was one of our second modules, our second prompts that we did in this class, right? What did you want to do on your own? What did you want to do on ChatGPT? And these are grade and completion, so they don't feel self-conscious about kind of their process or their environment or feel that they need to kind of hedge at all. But they're really useful conversations to have of like, where that critical thinking goes when we engage these tools, and then how we make sure that we're engaging them effectively, but not alienating students by being punitive or anything like that. And it's a really tough, I think, place to be. So I'm just going to share some kind of practical steps as kind of we're getting to a close, and then I'll open it up for any questions people might have. The things I've kind of realized from kind of this pilot of a class where I decided to tackle this head on alongside my students, which is, again, a luxury I have because they're college students and they can have these conversations with me in a particular way. But one was to not pretend it's not real or not there, or that it's just cheating. These tools are growing, they're evolving, they're becoming a part of kind of this like everyday discourse around media. And so it's important that we do tackle it head on. Now, again, is that as institutions and through a bureaucratic process? Probably not, for me at least. But I also created some modules, right, where I tried to create assignments with and without it to allow students to engage critically in what it was doing and what it was not doing for them. So one of the assignments, as I mentioned, was to say, hey, I want to know how you came to your research question that's going to animate the research you do for the rest of the semester. So what were some prompts you put into ChatGPT? What were some prompts you put into Bard if you have access to it? And what did it do? Now, once we have kind of this engagement, we understand what they're doing in their process and where it was helpful and where it was not. Okay. It wasn't the easiest way to get to it, but then the next assignment was I gave them a research question and I asked them to kind of pull the data with ChatGPT and pull the data without it to allow them to see the difference. And then we checked both for accuracy. And that became really important because students do not want to hand in something that is wrong. They just don't. Even when they're these more subjective kind of assignments. So this was really, really important. And they really did see the differences, and some of them had more fun doing it without, right? But giving the flexibility and kind of how the output was graded also allowed them to be kind of experimental in the process. So I was flexible on these assignments, right, in terms of what the output looked like, but really wanted to dig into the process with them. And finally, we did a lot of reflection in what I call their yeses and nos. And so yeses and nos is a concept I've borrowed from a queer pedagogy training, which basically takes things that are morally, ethically, identity-wise challenging to students in some kind of way. And rather than saying, is this right or is this wrong? Should we do this or should we not do this? What are your yeses? What feels really good when you use this? And what are your nos? Universally, pretty much, the yeses were like, it's quick. It's quick. It's saving me time. I'm so tired. I have so much to do. A lot of the nos were the fears I showed you, right? A big no that I got from a lot of students is, I worry it's making me less good at being a student. I'm better at doing assignments, but I'm less good at being a student potentially, right? So a lot of these critical thinking questions that we're having as well. So those are just some of the practical steps and strategies I used in my classroom to tackle it head on with students. And then this one last quote I think is really, really interesting, right? Because it kind of captures the gist of what students were saying to me. I definitely have used various forms of AI. I really like the Photoshop function that does the autofill on pictures. It's really fun to mess around with. It almost seems like magic. I also use ChatGPT occasionally to search for synonyms. It does a better job than Google because it understands the context of the word. Now that I've become accustomed to AI's existence, I don't really think much of it since it's still in its early stages of development. For my purposes, I simply see it as an alternative search engine. So for them, they're also kind of taking some of it in stride. We know these things are coming. We're just trying to get our assignments done. And so we think about it, but we don't think too much about it, right? So when prompted, we can tell you our anxieties about it, but in general, we're just going to keep rolling through, right? And so I think that that's really interesting and compelling to think on. So I would love to continue these conversations, but I just want to open the floor for any questions. And so I have put my email up on the screen. This is my personal email, not my work email, because non-institutional emails go into what's called quarantine and they disappear into the abyss. So if you would like to reach out, please feel free. This is my information, but otherwise I would love to stop sharing so I can see y'all's faces and open up for any questions or conversations or insights y'all might have.
I'll go ahead and go real quick. I'm sorry. I have a question about that you may not be able to speak to yet, but the moral framework of students of a younger age getting exposed to this in middle school or elementary school. Do you have any insight on how that may change the way that they respond to some of your questions about whether they think it's legal to use it, where it's not legal to use it? I feel I teach at a K-8 school, and I feel that they don't think about this as morally in depth as some of your responses that you got. They just kind of want the answer. And I think they feel like it's okay.
Yeah, I think that has to do, right, with the early adoption and these tools becoming naturalized at a young age, right? So I do think that that's actually a media literacy question. So one of the other projects I'm trying to work on is how we might take our youngest students that are being introduced to tools really early and they almost become to seem natural, how they might step back to become like people who didn't always have these tools to ask those critical questions. But I actually think that that needs to be a part of the curriculum too, which it's not, right? Uniformly, we don't have media literacy curriculums. But I do think that that's actually a really scary thing, because the more technology becomes naturalized, the less we are able to engage effectively with it. And so I do think it's a big question. I don't have a great answer for what we do about it, but I do think it's a question of media literacy and media literacy training for our kids. Any other questions? Well, then I will give you your 12 minutes back in your day, and I appreciate your time and your insights, and feel free to reach out, and I would love to connect with y'all.